you guys, my name is Aubrey, this is my channel, and today we're going to be talking about the SBA COVID relief and what to expect in the coming weeks. We have some big programs that have recently come to an official end. We have some big programs that are officially starting in just a few days, and there are some important things that you need to know. So in this video, we're going to be outlining exactly what these things are and what this means for you. So let's get started. So let's just dive right into it. So the last couple of days, and really I would expect the next few days, will probably be pretty slow whenever it comes to anything legislation-wise, because this past weekend was the 4th of July and it was a holiday week, and last week and this week are two of the most travel-intensive weeks of the summer, and so because of that, things are just progressing slowly. Things progress slowly all the time in Washington, and I think it shouldn't come to a surprise that it's also progressing slowly in July as well. But despite the fact that things are progressing slowly, there are still some things in the works and some things moving on in the background that could have a really big impact to you. Now, the first thing I want to talk about in this video is the child tax credit. Now, the child tax credit is going live in just a couple of short days. What this means is that if you're somebody that has an eligible child, meaning you meet the income threshold requirements outlined by the SBA, and your child is between the age of 0 and 17 years old, you could potentially receive either $3,000 or $3,600 on behalf of that child. This money will come in the form of two payments. You'll get half of it next year, next April, whenever you file your 2021 taxes, and you'll get the other half in the form of monthly payments starting in just a few days. And you'll get these payments every month between now and the end of the year. This is going to be so incredibly crucial to working families across the United States, and it will be a really great lifeline for those families that are struggling. Now, there are a few things that you should know and you should keep in mind when it comes to the child tax credit. Number one is if you are somebody that would prefer to not have monthly payments and instead you would rather wait until next year when you file your taxes and get it in one lump sum payment, then you would need to go to the IRS's website and you would need to opt into that option. Now, I did do a video on that a couple of days ago. I will link that video down in the description below. The second thing that you should know and keep in mind is that in order to be eligible and in order to opt in for the child tax credit, all you have to do is file your taxes. So if you're somebody that has filed your 2020 taxes, then you're good to go. You don't really need to do anything else. But if you're somebody that didn't file your taxes because you didn't make enough money to justify filing them, then you will need to fill out the non-filer form, which again, I did a video on this. If you're interested in checking out that video, I will again leave that in the description below so that you can check it out. It is very easy to fill out the non-filer form, but you will need to do this in order to be eligible and in order to receive the child tax credit. This is because the IRS is using 2020 tax returns in order to determine eligibility for the child tax credit. And so if you have a child that's claimed on your 2020 tax returns, then you would get that money for the child. But if you had a child recently, then that child wasn't claimed on your 2020 tax returns, and thus the IRS doesn't know that they exist yet. So you would get that money next April in one lump sum next year when you file your taxes. So for example, if you were eligible for the full amount of the payment, meaning you made less than $75,000, then you could receive $3,600 on behalf of that child next year. Next is the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, and for the sake of my own sanity, I'm going to refer to this as RRF from here on out because Restaurant Revitalization Fund is too hard for me to continue to say. So the RRF is a fund that was created in order to help restaurants stay afloat, in order to help restaurants stay open. The problem, though, was that this program ran out of money before the vast majority of people could apply, and the vast majority of people could be approved. As a result, a number of lawsuits were filed against the SBA, which sided against the SBA, and as a result, a lot of approval notices had to be rescinded and funds needed to be reallocated. But the solution was kind of too little too late because by the time this happened, the fund was basically out of money. Now, the SBA administrator, as of yesterday, actually announced this program was closed. She announced that the program was completely out of funds and they would not be allocating any more funds to this program. The portal is going to be staying open for a few more days, but that's really just so people can check loan status rather than to apply for a new loan. So basically, if you're somebody who is expecting funds through the RRF, then you should receive those in the next couple of days before the portal closes officially. Now, the one silver lining here is that legislators have been discussing and have been throwing around the idea of giving this fund more money. There's been discussions of allocating $60 billion more to this program. Now, this would, of course, in turn substantially increase the total amount of funds that this program has available to it. But the problem is that at this point, the discussions have been I would say dry at best. They haven't had a ton of progress with this discussion and with this narrative. Whether or not the discussions heat up, I don't know. So it's certainly not something I would hold my breath about, but I certainly don't think it's impossible either. I think it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in the coming weeks and in the coming days. Ultimately, I think it's a possibility. I don't think it's 100% likely. So if you're somebody who has a restaurant or food-focused business and you would like to take advantage of the RRF, then I would encourage you to stay tuned. I would encourage you to keep your eyes and your ears open for any news regarding this fund, but I certainly wouldn't count on receiving any funds if you haven't already been approved. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is this infrastructure bill. Whenever it comes to the infrastructure bill, there isn't a ton of progress, but there is a little bit of news, and this little bit of news is fairly substantial. So as you guys know, there has been discussions over the last couple of weeks of an infrastructure bill that has been dubbed as a bipartisan effort to fund infrastructure efforts in the United States. This is in response to President Joe Biden's American Jobs Plan and American Families Plan, which was announced in April and March of this year. Now, the bipartisan bill that lawmakers have kind of agreed on in a preliminary basis, it is focused on just infrastructure, and it is valued at about $1 trillion. Now, this effort would fund things like road improvements, railway improvements, bridges, transportation, things like that. But just because there's been a preliminary framework that has been agreed upon by lawmakers doesn't really mean that this is actually going to pass, because of the fact that Democratic lawmakers have already said that they will not agree on anything that doesn't contain any social infrastructure issues. Meaning, Democratic lawmakers will not pass on an infrastructure bill unless it includes efforts pertaining to things like free community college, like universal preschool, like paid family leave, like child resources, like clean energy, and more. This is, of course, an issue because Democrat and Republican lawmakers can't agree on this, and it is causing this entire ordeal to be drawn out way longer than it really needs to be. And as a result, Democratic lawmakers are exploring the option of budget reconciliation. Now, I've gone over the process of budget reconciliation a dozen times on this channel. It is fairly boring, fairly convoluted. If you're interested in learning about it, then I will include a link to that in the description below. But basically, what budget reconciliation is it is a way for lawmakers to get legislation passed that is budget related with a fewer amount of votes than they would traditionally need. It's basically a way for current Democratic lawmakers to get a budget-related bill passed without any Republican support. This is a strategy and a tactic that lawmakers have been using for decades as a way to get budget-related legislation and just legislation in general passed without needing the same amount of votes. But that brings us to present day, and that brings us to the small but significant update that I have for you, which is it has been announced and revealed by some White House officials that the White House is meeting with Republican lawmakers in order to come up with a middle ground for these social infrastructure issues. This is big news because this is something that wasn't happening in the past, and it's a discussion that hasn't really been taking place up until this point. Every piece of legislation begins with an initial discussion, and it looks as though that initial discussion has officially began in regards to the social infrastructure bill. But what happens here is anyone's guess. I mean, there is no telling what is going to happen over the next couple of months in regards to the social infrastructure bill. It's hard to say if Republicans will agree to anything. It's hard to say if Democrats will be able to fit any sort of social infrastructure bills into some of these more traditional infrastructure efforts. There is a lot on the table. There's a lot up in the air. There's just simply too many factors to take into consideration. I could never, ever predict what I think is going to happen. But regardless, it's still substantial that there is some discussions taking place between Republican lawmakers and the White House in regards to some social infrastructure efforts. But with it being said, you guys, this is really all of the updates that I have for you right now. I know that this week was a holiday, last week was a short week as well, and so because of that, progress is slow, but slow progress is still progress, and progress is always good, so it's good to know that things are happening in the background, even if they aren't substantial. So to reiterate, the RRF is officially closed. If it will get new funding is still to be determined. The child tax credit is coming in just a few short days, and a social infrastructure bill is in the works. If you guys have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it, so make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.